I am in love with my father-in-law. The moment I looked into my father-in-law's eyes, I knew everything was about to change. Hey, my name is Mary. And yes, I left my husband for his father. What happened next was something no one could have expected. Don't forget to subscribe, because this story gets crazier with every chapter. I used to think love was supposed to feel warm, like a blanket on a cold night. But sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the empty chair where David should have been, I felt nothing but cold. My name's Mary, and this is how my life started falling apart. David and I had been married for 6 years. At first, it was good, great even. He'd leave little notes on my pillow, call me his sunshine, and we'd laugh over burned dinners like it was our own private joke. But somewhere along the way, that David disappeared. The man I loved turned into a stranger who barely looked at me. Tonight was no different. It was 9 p.m., and the lasagna I'd spent hours making sat untouched, congealing in its dish. I texted David at 6, asking when he'd be home. No reply. I called at 7, straight to voicemail. By 8, I stopped trying. My stomach twisted as I pictured him at some bar, laughing with people who weren't me. Did he even care that I was waiting? I wasn't always this sad. I used to be the girl who danced in the rain, who dreamed of a big family and a house full of noise. But David's silence had chipped away at that girl. Every ignored text, every night he stumbled in late smelling of whiskey, every time he brushed off my questions, it was like he was erasing me. I'd ask, "What's wrong?" and he'd snap, "Nothing, Mary, just drop it." So I did. I stopped asking. I stopped fighting. I stopped feeling like I mattered. That night, I sat there staring at our wedding photo on the wall. We looked so happy, my white dress, his goofy grin. I wanted to cry, but my eyes were dry. I was too tired for tears. Instead, I whispered to the empty room, "What happened to us?" The silence answered back. I didn't know when it started, but I'd begun to feel like a ghost in my own home. David would walk past me like I was invisible. Last week, I'd spent all day cleaning the house, hoping he'd notice. He didn't. Not a word. I'd bought a new dress, red and bold, thinking it might catch his eye. He glanced up from his phone, grunted, and went back to scrolling. I stood there feeling stupid, the dress suddenly too tight, too loud, too much. I tried to fix it. God, I tried. I suggested date nights, but he'd say he was busy. I cooked his favorite meals, but he'd eat in front of the TV, not at the table with me. I even asked if he wanted to talk to someone, a counselor, maybe. He laughed, cold and sharp, and said, "What for? So you can complain about me?" That hurt worse than the silence. I wasn't perfect. Maybe I nagged too much or got too clingy. Maybe I didn't laugh at his jokes like I used to. But I loved him. I loved him even when he stopped loving me. And that was the worst part, knowing I was holding on to something that wasn't there anymore. That night, as the clock ticked past 10, I heard the front door creak. My heart jumped, pathetic as it was. David shuffled in, his jacket slung over one shoulder, his eyes glassy. He didn't look at me, just kicked off his shoes and mumbled, "Work ran late." Work. Always the same excuse. I knew it was a lie, but I didn't call him out. What was the point? "Food's cold," I said softly, pointing to the lasagna. He shrugged. "Not hungry." Then he grabbed a beer from the fridge and headed to the couch. The TV flickered on, filling the house with noise that drowned out my thoughts. I stayed at the table, my hands shaking. I wanted to scream, to throw the lasagna at the wall to make him see me. But I didn't. I just sat there, small and quiet like always. The truth settled in my chest like a stone. My marriage was dying and I didn't know how to save it. Worse, I wasn't sure I wanted to anymore. As I cleared the table, scraping uneaten food into the trash, I caught my reflection in the window. My eyes looked hollow, my face tired. Who was this woman? Not the Mary who danced in the rain. Not the Mary who believed in forever. I turned away, my throat tight, and promised myself one thing. I couldn't keep living like this. The house felt heavier every day, like the walls were soaking up my sadness. David barely spoke to me anymore, and when he did, it was sharp, like he was annoyed I existed. I'd wake up hoping today might be different, but it never was. Then Richard showed up, and everything started to shift. Richard was David's father, a widower who lived a few hours away. He called one morning, saying he needed a place to stay for a couple of weeks while his house got some repairs. David shrugged it off, like it was no big deal. "Dad's fine," he said, already halfway out the door to wherever he went these days. I didn't mind. Richard was always kind, the kind of person who smiled with his eyes. I figured having him around might break up the silence. The first night, Richard arrived with a small suitcase and a warm hug. "Mary, you look like you're keeping this place together," he said, his voice soft but steady. I laughed, awkward, because I didn't feel like I was keeping anything together. David wasn't home. Big surprise. So I helped Richard settle into the guest room. He thanked me 3 times, like it was a privilege to be there. It felt strange, someone noticing me. Over the next few days, Richard became a quiet light in the house. He'd sit at the kitchen table with his coffee, reading the paper, but he'd always look up when I walked in. "How's your morning going?" he'd ask, and he actually waited for an answer. Not like David, who'd grunt and keep scrolling his phone. I started telling Richard little things, how I burned the toast, how the neighbor's dog kept digging up my flowers. He'd laugh, not at me but with me, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel invisible. One evening, I was washing dishes, my hand shaking because David had snapped at me earlier. He'd come home late again, and when I asked where he'd been, he said, "Stop acting like my mom, Mary." It cut deep. I was scrubbing a plate too hard, trying not to cry, when Richard walked in. "You okay?" he asked, leaning against the counter. His voice was gentle, like he really saw me. I froze. Nobody had asked me that in so long. "I'm fine," I lied, but my voice cracked. Richard didn't push. He just picked up a dish towel and started drying the plates, standing close enough that I could smell his aftershave. We worked in silence, but it wasn't the heavy kind I was used to. It was comfortable. When we finished, he looked at me and said, "You don't have to be fine all the time, Mary. It's okay to hurt." My throat got tight, and I turned away so he wouldn't see my eyes well up. After that, I started noticing Richard more. The way he'd fix a squeaky door without being asked. How he'd compliment my cooking, even when it was just spaghetti. One afternoon, I was in the backyard, pulling weeds to keep my hands busy. David hadn't touched me in months. Not a hug, not a hand on my shoulder, and I was trying not to think about it. Richard came out with 2 glasses of lemonade. "Thought you could use a break," he said, sitting on the grass next to me. We talked for hours about nothing and everything. He told me stories about his old job as a carpenter, about David as a kid. I told him things I hadn't said out loud in years. How I used to paint, how I missed feeling alive. He listened, really listened, his eyes locked on mine like I was the only thing in the world. When I said I felt like I was fading away, he reached over and squeezed my hand. "You're not fading, Mary," he said. "You're still here." His touch lingered, warm and steady, and my heart did something it hadn't in ages. It raced. I pulled my hand back, my cheeks burning. He was David's father. This was wrong, wasn't it? But as I lay in bed that night, David snoring beside me, I couldn't stop thinking about Richard's kindness. It was like water after years of drought. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I wanted more of it. And that scared me more than anything. I never meant for it to happen. I swear I didn't. But some moments sneak up on you, like a spark in dry grass, and before you know it, everything's on fire. That's what it was like with Richard, the man who was supposed to be safe, forbidden, anything but mine. David was gone again. Another late night, another vague excuse about work. I stopped believing him months ago, but I didn't have the energy to fight. The house was quiet, too quiet, and my thoughts were loud enough to drown out the world. Richard was still staying with us, his 2 weeks stretching into 3. I didn't mind. His presence was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. That night, I was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a glass of wine I barely sipped. I felt like a shell, hollow, fragile, ready to crack. Richard came downstairs, his footsteps soft on the creaky steps. "Can't sleep?" he asked, standing in the doorway. He was wearing an old flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up, looking more like a friend than my father-in-law. I shook my head, too tired to lie. He sat on the other end of the couch, leaving space between us. "Want to talk?" he said. His voice was always so calm, like he could hold the weight of anything I threw at him. I didn't plan to say much, but once I started, I couldn't stop. I told him how David's coldness was killing me, how I felt like a failure for letting my marriage rot. I told him I didn't know who I was anymore. My voice broke and tears came. Hot, messy tears I couldn't hold back. Richard slid closer, his hand resting on my shoulder. "Mary, you're not a failure," he said. "You're carrying too much and it's not fair." His thumb brushed my arm, steady and warm. I looked at him, really looked, and saw something in his eyes. Concern. Yes, but something deeper. Something that made my breath catch. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was me, leaning into his touch. Maybe it was him, his hand sliding to my cheek. But suddenly we were close, too close, and the air felt electric. "We shouldn't," I whispered, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break my ribs. "I know," he said, his voice low, almost pained. But neither of us pulled away. Then he kissed me. Soft at first, like he was testing the water, giving me a chance to stop it. I didn't. I kissed him back. Desperate, like I'd been starving for years and he was the only thing that could fill me. His hands cupped my face, and for one perfect moment, I wasn't the broken wife or the ghost in my own house. I was alive, wanted, seen. But reality crashed in fast. I yanked back, my lips tingling, my chest heaving. "Oh my God," I gasped, stumbling off the couch. Richard's face was a mix of shock and guilt, his hands frozen where I'd left them. "Mary, I'm sorry," he started, but I shook my head, already halfway to the stairs. "No, don't," I choked out. I ran to my room, David's room, our room, and shut the door, my back pressed against it like I could block out what just happened. I slid to the floor, my hands shaking. I'd kissed my husband's father, my father-in-law, the man who'd been kinder to me than anyone in years. Guilt clawed at my stomach, sharp and relentless. David might not love me anymore, but he didn't deserve this. Nobody deserved this. I was a traitor, a fool, a mess. But even as I hated myself, I couldn't shake the truth. That kiss felt more real than anything I'd had with David in years. It wasn't just lips touching, it was Richard seeing me, all of me, and not turning away. I pressed my fingers to my mouth, remembering his warmth, and a tiny, dangerous part of me wanted it again. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, David's empty side mocking me. When I heard him come home at 2 a.m., reeking of beer, I didn't move. I just closed my eyes and saw Richard's face. I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't undo, and God help me, I wasn't sure I wanted to. I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. That kiss with Richard wasn't just a mistake. It was a door I'd opened, and now I was walking through it, knowing every step was wrong, but unable to stop. I told myself I'd never let it happen again. But promises are brittle when you're starving for something you can't have. The morning after the kiss, I avoided Richard's eyes at breakfast. David was there, hungover and silent, scrolling his phone like always. Richard passed me the coffee pot, his fingers brushing mine for half a second. My skin burned, and I nearly dropped the mug. "Careful," he said, his voice steady, but I saw the flicker in his gaze. He wasn't talking about the coffee. I mumbled something and left the kitchen, my heart hammering. I tried to stay away. I really did. I threw myself into chores, scrubbing floors, folding laundry, anything to keep my hands busy and my mind off him. But Richard was everywhere. He'd be in the living room, reading, and I'd catch him watching me. He'd help with dishes, standing too close, and my body would hum like it was waking up after years of sleep. Every glance, every accidental touch was a match struck in the dark. It was a week later when it happened again. David was out, where else? And I was in the backyard, staring at the stars, trying to figure out who I'd become. Richard found me, his jacket slung over one shoulder. "You look lost," he said, sitting beside me on the grass. I laughed, bitter. "I am." Then I started talking about David, about the emptiness, about how I didn't know how to fix myself. He listened, like always, his eyes soft and steady. When I ran out of words, he took my hand. "You don't have to go through this alone," he said. I should have pulled away. I should have run. Instead, I leaned into him and we kissed again. This time not soft, not careful, but hungry. It was like falling, reckless and terrifying, but I didn't want to stop. We ended up in the guest room, clothes tangled on the floor, whispers in the dark. For the first time in years, I felt wanted. After that, we couldn't stay away from each other. Stolen moments became our secret world, brushing hands in the hallway, meeting in the garage when David was gone, quiet nights when the house was asleep. Every touch was electric, every word heavy. Richard would hold me after, his arms strong, and whisper, "You deserve to be loved, Mary." I'd close my eyes, pretending we were different people in a different life. But guilt was my shadow. Every time I looked at David, my stomach twisted. He didn't know, but his ignorance didn't make it better. He was still distant, still cruel in his indifference, but he was my husband. I'd vowed to love him, and here I was, sneaking around with his father. I'd lie awake next to him, Richard's scent still on my skin, and hate myself. I'd think of my wedding day, my white dress, my promises, and wonder how I'd fallen so far. I justified it to keep from breaking. David didn't love me anymore, hadn't for years. He checked out, left me alone in this marriage. Richard saw me, cared for me, filled the holes David had carved. Was it so wrong to want that? But deep down, I knew the answer. It was wrong. It was messy. It was us. The tension at home grew thicker. David started noticing things, not the affair, but the cracks. I was jumpy, distracted. Richard was too calm, too careful. One night, David snapped, "What's with you two? You're acting weird." My heart stopped, but Richard laughed it off, saying he was just trying to help me cope with David's long hours. David grunted and dropped it, but his eyes lingered on me, suspicious. I felt like I was suffocating. I knew it couldn't last. Secrets like ours don't stay buried. They fester, they claw their way out. But every time I tried to end it, Richard would look at me, his hand grazing mine, and I'd crumble. I was addicted to him, to the way he made me feel alive. And that addiction was pulling me toward a cliff I couldn't see the bottom of. Secrets are like cracks in a dam. Sooner or later, the pressure builds and everything bursts. I'd been fooling myself, thinking Richard and I could keep our affair hidden forever. But truth has a way of clawing free. And when it did, it tore my world apart. It was a Tuesday night, one of those muggy evenings where the air felt too thick to breathe. David came home earlier than usual, his face tight, like he was carrying something heavy. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, trying to act normal. Richard was in the living room, reading, but I could feel his presence like a pulse. We'd been so careful, stolen glances, coded words, but careful wasn't enough. David dropped his keys on the counter, louder than usual. "Mary," he said, his voice sharp. I froze, the knife hovering over a carrot. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at his phone, his jaw clenched. "You want to tell me what this is?" He turned the screen toward me. My stomach dropped. It was a text, a screenshot from someone I didn't know. "Asterisk, check your wife and your dad. Saw them at the park last week. Too close for family, asterisk." My mouth went dry. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. David's eyes flicked to me, dark and cold. "Well," he snapped. I set the knife down, my hand shaking. "It's nothing," I lied, but my voice cracked, giving me away. Richard must have heard, because he walked in, his face calm but his shoulders tense. "What's going on?" he asked, like he didn't already know. David laughed, a bitter, jagged sound. "You tell me, Dad." He shoved the phone at Richard, who glanced at it and went still. The room felt like it was shrinking, the walls closing in. David's voice rose. "You two think I'm stupid? I've seen the looks, the whispers. What the hell is this?" He wasn't just angry, he was hurt, his eyes glassy with something I hadn't seen in years, betrayal. I wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor and never come back. But Richard stepped forward, his voice steady. "David, let's talk about this like men." That was the wrong thing to say. David exploded. "Like men? You're screwing my wife." He lunged at Richard, shoving him against the wall. I screamed, "Stop it," but David wasn't hearing me. He swung, his fist clipping Richard's jaw. Richard didn't fight back. He just stood there, taking it, blood trickling from his lip. "David, please." I grabbed his arm, tears streaming down my face. He spun on me, his eyes wild. You, he spat. You did this. My own father, Mary. How could you? His voice broke, and for a second I saw the man I'd married. Raw, human, destroyed. Guilt hit me like a tidal wave. I'd done this. I'd broken him. Richard wiped his mouth, his voice low but firm. I love her, David. I'm not sorry for that. The room went silent, like the world stopped breathing. David stared at him, then at me, his face crumpling. You love her, he repeated, almost a whisper. He looked at me, searching for something, an apology, a denial. I couldn't give him either. All I could do was cry. David staggered back, shaking his head. You're both disgusting, he said, his voice thick. He grabbed his keys and stormed out, the door slamming so hard the windows rattled. The silence he left behind was worse than the shouting. Richard reached for me, but I flinched. Don't, I said, my voice raw. I couldn't look at him. Not yet. I sank to the floor, my knees giving out. Everything was ruined. My marriage, my family, my life. I'd wanted love, but at what cost? David's face haunted me, his pain cutting deeper than his anger. I'd betrayed him in the worst way, and there was no one doing it. But then I thought of Richard, his kindness, his touch, the way he made me feel alive. My heart pulled in two directions, tearing itself apart. Richard knelt beside me, his hand hovering but not touching. Mary, he said softly, you have to choose. I'll stand by you, whatever you decide. I looked into his eyes, warm and steady, and saw a future I wanted but didn't deserve. Then I thought of David, broken and gone, and wondered if I could ever fix what I'd shattered. The choice was mine, and it felt like choosing between breathing and drowning. I used to think love was supposed to be easy, like a song you hum without thinking. But standing at the edge of my old life, I learned love is messy, painful, and sometimes worth every bruise. Choosing Richard wasn't just choosing a man, it was choosing myself. And it came at a price I'd pay forever. After that awful night, David didn't come home. I didn't blame him. His last words, calling me disgusting, echoed in my head, carving deeper each time. I packed a bag and stayed at a motel, too ashamed to face Richard, too broken to face myself. My phone buzzed with angry texts from David's sister, my cousins, even friends I hadn't talked to in years. The secret was out, spreading like wildfire. Everyone knew I'd betrayed my husband with his father. I met David a week later at a diner to talk. He looked like he hadn't slept, eyes red, hands unsteady. Why, Mary? He asked, his voice so small it hurt. I wanted to lie, to make it easier, but he deserved the truth. You stopped seeing me, I said. Richard did. His face twisted, and he left without another word. The divorce papers came soon after. Signing them felt like cutting off a limb. Necessary, but agonizing. We'd been married 6 years, and now it was over. Richard waited for me. He didn't push, didn't beg, just gave me space to decide. I spent weeks wrestling with my heart. Every night, I'd lie awake, picturing David's pain, then Richard's warmth. I hated myself for wanting Richard, for loving him. But I did. God help me, I did. When I finally went back to him, he held me like I was something precious. I'll never stop loving you, he said. I believed him. We moved to a small apartment across town, away from the house that held too many ghosts. Richard proposed one quiet evening, no ring, just his hand in mine. Marry me, Mary, he said. Let's build something real. My heart said yes before my head caught up. I nodded, tears falling, knowing the world would hate us but not caring anymore. The wedding was simple, a courthouse ceremony with a judge and 2 strangers as witnesses. I wore a white sundress, nothing fancy, but Richard looked at me like I was in a ball gown. When he slid a plain gold band on my finger, I felt whole for the first time in years. We kissed, soft and sure, and I whispered, I love you. He smiled, his eyes crinkling. Always. The backlash was brutal. David's family cut us off. My parents called me, begging me to fix this mistake. Old friends unfollowed me online, their silence louder than words. At the grocery store, I'd catch whispers, that's her, the one who married her father-in-law. I'd grip Richard's hand tighter, my chin high, but inside, it stung. I wasn't just Mary anymore. I was a scandal, a story people told to gasp and judge. David reached out once, months later. A letter, handwritten, shaky. I hate what you did, but I hope you're happy. I cried reading it, not because I regretted my choice, but because I'd hurt him so deeply. I wrote back, a short note, I'm sorry. I hope you find peace. I never heard from him again. Part of me will always carry that wound, the knowledge I broke a man who once loved me. But Richard, Richard, was my home. He'd cook breakfast on Sundays, humming old songs. He'd listen when I rambled about my day, laugh when I spilled coffee on my shirt. He saw me, every messy piece, and loved me anyway. With him, I started painting again, colors splashing across canvases like I was rediscovering myself. I wasn't the girl who danced in the rain anymore, but I was someone new, stronger, braver. People still talk. They call it wrong, unnatural, shameful. Let them. I don't care anymore. I didn't just marry David's father. I married the man who held me when I was falling apart, who reminded me I was worth loving when I'd forgotten how. Richard gave me back my heart, and I'll spend my life giving him mine. Standing on our tiny balcony, his arm around me, I look at the stars and feel something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. This is my story, not perfect, not clean, but mine. And I'd choose it again every time.